Welcome to our MedImpact webinar, where we're going to be discussing strategies for measuring and communicating the impact of medical affairs. It is good to have so many medical affairs professionals join us today. Many of you we've had the chance to work with before, and there's some new faces, so I'm really excited. For those I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Scott Thompson. I'm co-CEO at Acceleration Point, and I've had the privilege of working with so many of you over the last 15 years. This year is 15 years for us. And during that time, whether it is through insights or operations or systems, just really helping to make the lives of medical affairs teams and field medical teams easier, and also help measure and communicate the impact. And today I am so excited to be bringing with us to the conversation our VP of Medical Excellence, Linda Traylor. Give yourself a quick introduction, Linda.
Hello, welcome. And I agree. We really appreciate you being here. As Scott said, Linda Traylor, head of medical excellence at Acceleration Point. I have been in industry for more than 25 years and joined and moved over to the consulting world a few years ago and joined the leadership team at Acceleration Point coming up on 2 years. So I am excited to be here. And one of my favorite topics is the topic of today.
Excellent. Well, really excited for this session. We do have some content for you, but we also want this to be interactive. So, what we'll do is we're going to be talking fairly broadly about how to communicate and measure the impact of medical affairs today based on work that we've done with now it's over 30 different medical teams. And so we're going to just share what the process is, the framework, some of the beliefs and mindsets that go with it. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll make sure we're looking for those, and we're looking forward to discussing those with you. So maybe just to start, right? This is not a new topic, right? This challenge has been around for as long as medical affairs has, and when you go to any of the conferences, any of the meetings, there's so much conversation about this. And so what I think is helpful is to make sure we contextualize around what the specific challenges are that we're facing. So I'd love to share with you the challenges that we most typically see. The first is that metrics don't tell our real story. I hear this all the time when I'm working with medical affairs teams that, when we count the number of interactions or we count the number of people we've engaged with or how many times we had a discussion on a particular topic, that doesn't actually tell the story. Right. So we need something that really connects back to our purpose about why we are here. The second challenge I hear is that it needs to be about quality, not quantity, right? That we have a lot of things we can count, but what was the impact or the quality of those interactions of the work that we've done, right? It's not about the quantity of publications or the quantity of ad boards we did. It's what did we learn, right? Okay. Uh, the next one that I hear is that while we inherently know it, we sometimes have trouble communicating this impact in a way that commercial and other executives understand. And then the last one that we hear is that each therapeutic area, each territory is different. So it's really hard to come to a set of standard metrics or standard measures that can apply. Right. So those are the challenges that we are often faced with when we're working with teams. I'd love to hear from you. What is the biggest challenge you're facing in measuring or communicating the impact of your team? And that could be of medical, it could be a field medical. Just type that into the chat for me because I'd love to make sure that we can address your specific challenges. All right. So just put that right there in the chat. Let's see what your biggest challenges are. Let's see. So what behind our interactions. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. People that are obsessed with quantity. It's hard to shift to quality. Absolutely. What else we got? It can be often hard to identify how to measure impact. Yeah. So, we can talk about all the things we do, but did it change anything? Was there an impact? The difference between medical and commercial interactions. Yeah. So, right. What is expected in each, and how can each contribute differently, and how would you measure them different? Excellent. Anybody else? Lack of clarity for what stakeholders want reported. Yeah. So, right. This is a leadership alignment discussion around what is important. Right. And so if we don't have clarity about what's important, it's hard to then communicate those. Easily link medical activities to objectives. Yeah. So, what role does the commercial success of our organization expect out of medical affairs in a compliant way? Right. And if we don't get really crisp on what that expectation is, it's hard to then connect to those broader objectives. Strategic alignment. Yeah. Make sure we're tied to strategy. And, sometimes I see people have like these like three big pillars and they try to organize everything around the three big pillars, but they're not sometimes specific enough. Yeah. And how to communicate the scientific value who to commercial teams that are yeah, very numbers driven. Absolutely. Closing the loops. Yeah. So, we do all this work around insights. How does it refine our strategy? How do we showcase our internal activities? Yes. Such as, yeah. So we make a contribution and an impact to others who then go need that for their work. Absolutely. Fantastic. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to share with you what we call the MedImpact model. We have seen that one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest ways to overcome those challenges is to get really, really clear on three different topics, right? And what happens is when we have all of these conversations, all of these challenges that you wrote, and we try to meld them all together, they get confusing. So what we're going to do is we're going to share with you that there's three parts to explaining impact, or our contribution to it. So the first is impact. Right? And impact is what is the outcome or the change that our activities lead to. The second is what is our function, our team's contribution to that change. And then finally, where a lot of people start, but it's really the last step, is did we execute on the things that we promised to do? Okay. Did we execute on the things that we promised to do? And when we mix those things up, execution metrics, we promised to do a certain amount of something or to do something to a certain standard or quality with the impact that those things are supposed to have, that's where it starts to get messy. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Linda, who's going to start by really walking through the three parts of uh, describing impact. Because if we don't start there, none of the rest of it will make sense. Linda, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I love the feedback that we got from in the chat because that's exactly what we're covering today. Is exactly the challenge we're having. Over the course of my career, I've written, read, tried to interpret so many medical strategies that I have lost count. But it's a lot. And even on the consulting side, I'm with engaging with clients, I'm reading a lot of these medical strategies. And some of them, like I was reading one this morning that I would actually categorize as some of the best in class structure. Almost exclusively, they're prepared and written in these PowerPoint presentations. And the challenge is operationalizing that PowerPoint into across the different teams that lead to this impact story that we're building. The ABCs of what we do in medical affairs is increasing awareness, understanding beliefs that lead to clinical behaviors we care about. So the key, if I could emphasize the clinical behavior part, that is the part in which you take this beautiful medical strategy in your PowerPoint that highlights things like, drive early detection or diagnosis of patients and making sure there's the physicians understand the unmet need, these high level statements that are vision statements, mission statements, whatever, in these documents, they have to be translated into very specific clinical behaviors that we can track and measure. And so really operationalizing it is putting some specificity to the clinical behaviors we are trying to impact. So let's kind of jump into what that looks like. ABCs. So all of our actions in medical affairs in field medical and other organizations within medical affairs are leading to our North Star, improving patient lives. That's why we're here. That's what we do. The actions we take are leading to an increased awareness and a change in a belief that leads to a change in clinical behavior. That's our impact story. So the more specificity we have around that, the more we can measure it through external sources, but also internal sources and tracking beliefs and mindset that are really tied to those clinical behaviors. And we're going to go through that in detail, what that looks like. We track that through insights. All of our actions are tracked through insights. If you go back to the slide just for a second, the insights are the data source that we bring in to assess how we're doing along that line. And we try to look at structured insights, HCP mindsets, key insight questions. We can also capture organic insights, but that's becoming less and less common because organic insights should really be reserved for those really unique black swans that are hard to find. So this is where we were talking about the impact, contribution, execution, all are separate things that you need to build, but they should all be tied together. And now we're focusing in on translating that medical strategy into specific clinical behaviors we're trying to impact, and then tying it to beliefs through insight collection. So let's jump into HCP mindsets are really the leading indicators of a physician's belief that underlies their clinical decision making. So let's jump into what that looks like. There are 3 steps to an impactful HCP mindset alignment, developing those. First, as we've been saying, and I'll keep saying over and over again, you have to tie your mindsets, your belief statements, your sentiment analysis, however you categorize it in at your organization. They have to be mapped to the clinical behaviors that everybody should be driving towards. And that is your impact story. They should be structured. They're structured in a way that aligns to the core scientific narrative, the categories of the core scientific narrative, like unmet need, mechanism of action, good clinical outcome, sequencing, switching, persistence, efficacy, all of those categories that define our core scientific narrative provide the structured categories for which we need to track and our mindset are against. And then the last piece of it, the third step that's critical to being successful at using mindsets and key insight questions to measuring impact is they need to be baselined and tracked longitudinally. You can't measure a change in something unless you know what the baseline level of that is. So you have to define your key insight, your clinical behaviors, and your beliefs, and baseline them and track them longitudinally. So now we're going to jump into what that looks like. And stating the obvious here, at the end of the day, what we need to understand is that these mindsets over time are the leading indicator of our organizational impact, our impact story. We want to be able to say at the end of the day that in January 2023, 25% of our HCP believed there was an unmet need for treating our patients. And over a period of time, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, whatever your defined period of time is for making your impact, we moved the needle up to 75%. That's your impact story. Now, here's the key. There is transitioning that mindset, that beliefs that leads to clinical behavior change is a team sport. It is not it cannot be tied to any one individual. There is no one person that's going to be responsible for moving people along the continuum, a baseline belief to an elevated belief. That is the team sport part of it. So that's when you're developing your team metrics and when your individual metrics, it shouldn't be tied to moving people along that, because changing minds is not the impact. It is impact, but it's not the individual contribution. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So the best practices around building this story, this mindset ladder, this belief map, we call it scientific journey. Our clients call it many things like belief map. We've heard, but the scientific journey encapsulates the story part of it, the journey part of it. And so the first step is really developing that storyline to your beliefs. Now, this is where patient centricity comes into the story. The patient journey is really where your scientific narrative, your clinical behaviors that you care about should follow along the patient journey, defining the patient, diagnosing the patient, all the way to longitudinally tracking and managing the patient. The other key sort of best practice is number two, and this is the challenge that you have to, some of the behavior change you have to institute within your organization, is you need to track this at every interaction. Every interaction is an opportunity to learn. And you're going to get pushback about how much time it takes. In the end, you're already tracking interactions. It does not add much time to quickly record somebody's belief and why they believe it, and while you're recording that interaction. And doing it as close to real time as possible increases the consistency and accuracy of the data you're collecting. 3, coordinate your measurements. Like any other activities you're measuring, understanding high burden HCP, some of the initiatives we hear about a lot is understanding care gap, which is essentially another measure of behavior. Really, what you want to make sure you're doing is everything you're tracking is aligned to your scientific journey story, that everything is moving or supporting the pillars of your scientific journey. And the what somebody believes is completely different from the why they believe it. They're two separate measures, and they both function together to make what you guys were talking about is how do you take it from insight collection to making actionable and driving strategy. It's the what and the why combined together, collected over time, longitudinally. That should be driving insight generation. Data collection should be driving your medical strategy. And we're going to walk through what that looks like in practice. So first step, telling the story. If you think about your product life cycle over time in the pre-launch, peri-launch, post-launch phases, the insight journey changes over time. What you're interested in collecting, what you need to learn, from who you need to learn it, when you need to learn it by, all of those listening priorities follow an insight journey that should be mapped up to your scientific journey, which goes all the way from finding the patient to making sure that the safety and efficacy of your product is being applied to the right patient at the right time. So a lot of times we see that, especially in medical affairs, we love to start with data, the data story. We go in and we immediately start talking about the safety and efficacy of our data, even if it's a pre-launch emerging data. But it's you have to think about it in the context of the patient journey. If a physician agrees with your safety and efficacy data, but their behavior is not changing, it's likely related to the fact that they're not seeing their patient visualizing that patient walking through their door. They understand what good looks like, what is the best clinical outcome, especially if you're changing standard of care. If the MOA is critical to making the right treatment decision for the right patient, they need to understand it. You need to put some emphasis on that, all the way up to do they have access and do they really understand the safety and efficacy and how that translate into good clinical outcomes. So that is building your story should follow this narrative. The other part of it, step 2, is tracking this longitudinally, collecting at every interaction. So let's go to the next slide and we'll see why that's important. Because when we start to see data come in about any one of these pillars or belief statements, and that we'll build alignment statements too, if whether you follow a Likert scale from 1 to 5, or we believe in building anchor statements to guide the teams in making an accurate assessment of where somebody falls on the alignment scale. In order to for this to be of value, again, you need to baseline it. But as you track longitudinally, you're going to see that profiles emerge, and these profiles are very strategically adjacent in the sense that if I could ask any MSL, and I myself could name 5 people immediately that every time I engage with them, their behavior didn't change, but their belief was all over the map. I could see some of these people in my mind. I also know the early adopters in this right-hand slide that you're seeing. Those people who quickly jump to, believing in the data, and their behavior starts to mirror that. But we also know that early adopters tend to be, they change behaviors very quickly, right? They can come all the way up to belief, but then, they see the next shiny toy and you're starting all over. So you have to, and you would take a different strategy for this one profile versus the variable belief. So these are the types of information that materialize from your structured data that feed your medical strategy, not only the engagement strategy at your field medical level, but also you begin to build materials for the early adopters versus the variable belief patterns versus the people that just are the skeptics. Those profiles bubble up and you can make strategic decisions about those. But what they believe and why they believe it are two different things that need to be tracked and tracked together. So let's take a look at the next slide. We see in these profiles that begin to emerge over time that when somebody starts to have a full alignment, you've engaged them enough to awareness, scientific exchange, HCP education programs, engaging at congresses, having webinars, whatever you're doing to increase awareness, it's up there. They have a belief that mirrors it, but their clinical behavior is unchanged. Why that clinical behavior is unchanged is very critical. First of all, this profile, we are not putting these people on the podium, right? Because the minute they start talking about the data and how much they believe it, and they get a question about whether or not they're using it, they lose all credibility because they're not. The second thing is the why they're not their behavior is not mirroring what they believe is it could be anything from their institution. It's not part of the clinical pathway. Their institution won't allow it, or their patients don't have access, or their patients don't want it, or it's a hard sell, or there's so many different whys associated with why somebody's behavior is low that we need to be able to capture that along with what their belief is and what their behavior is. And this is an example, a case study of what kind of bringing all of these concepts together, what this can look like. This is an actual client that I have genericized to protect confidentiality, but it's essentially ex-US team that one of their strategic imperatives was to support guideline updates to change standard of care and outcomes in a rare skin disease. And what they wanted to do is they had strong data that they believed that suggested the standard of care should be reducing these skin symptoms to greater than 90%. And the current standard of care is reduction to 75% of the outcomes is what you should try and achieve with therapy. So in order to one get to assess the impact of moving physicians along to making these guideline changes, we need to baseline some of the key stakeholder here. And in this case, it was dermatologists and allergists. They set expectations of collecting this data over a 6-month period, 200 each, and assessing what their temperature was around supporting guideline changes. And what came back was that the majority of dermatologists agreed and the majority of allergists did not agree. And if you didn't have information on why this was, you would make a lot of assumptions that would make your strategic decisions maybe not applicable. In the case of the allergists here, in this case, the biggest reason why they didn't believe is because they thought it was a pharma contrived endpoint and there wasn't yet enough real world data to support a standard of care change. So the strategic actions this team is taking is building a strategy to gain trust and understanding from allergists, what is that minimum? What does it take to make that change? What do they need to see? And building some trust back with them. And for dermatologists, they're starting to build more champions to help drive that change. So all of their strategic decisions they're making are moving these key stakeholders along this continuum. Now let's kind of step into how to get to this level of accurate data to make strategic decisions. Each team is contributing something to this. So I'm going to toss it back over to Scott to talk through the contribution.
Yeah. So everybody, I think this is the first and most important step, right? If we don't believe that the reason medical affairs is here is to generate data, to generate evidence, to get it reviewed and adopted within the medical community through publications and through congresses, and then educate on it so that the data changes beliefs and so that belief changes the behavior, then like that is the impact, right? If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat, right? There the parts that Linda walked through on collecting the change in the belief over time is critical. And then you can cross-reference what a field team brings in with what somebody's saying on social versus what they're saying on podium, all with the directional and early leading indicator type of measurement to then go look to see, do things change in practice? Okay. So if you have any questions about that, put that in the chat. Now, that's the impact. And what's been really exciting is when people start to really craft their ability to communicate this impact, the what the commercial teams focus on change, what the executives focus on change, right? When we can say we are seeing a X% increase in diagnosis or of testing or of referral, right? Whatever those things are. And we have this high degree of understanding why people believe or don't believe or support, don't support our data. That is the role that we've then provided toward that. Okay. And that's what they get excited about, is seeing that change. Now, we still need to be able to have a way of communicating the contribution the individual medical affairs teams are making towards that impact. Now, as Linda will say, there are always going to be more factors that impact a clinical behavior or a belief than are in our control. And the amount of rigor it would take to get to 100% certainty that this team did this one thing and that's what drove it, you won't be able to get to. Okay. But when we get to contributions, we are able to show if certain activities we do are making an impact. While I'm transitioning into this, we do have a question, which is how do you control for observer bias when reporting beliefs? Strong tendency to increase numbers. Can you maybe comment on that, Linda?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really comes down to a number of ways. We approach this to help teams sort of remove. You're never going to remove all bias, right? So let's just make sure that we set expectations of what we're going to be able to do. It's still subjective, but the ways to bring consistency and accuracy to the data are a couple of things. One, don't build metrics to the individual at the individual level that that is tied to their performance for, moving, an HCP from a 3 to a 5, say, on a Likert scale, for example. Because you start to game the system, you lose, accuracy, and you introduce that bias because they will automatically move. I did it. I've gamed the system while I was in MSL. That's just the nature of the beast. The other aspect of it is so you take away their contribution is bringing in consistent and accurate data, not moving the needle at the individual level. At the team level, you can look for um, moving people along the continuum. But the way to also overcome some of this bias is to calibrate as a team. One of the exercises we do consistently with our clients is doing these calibration exercises. So as they start to bring in data, we start to have follow-up meetings with the team at the individual sort of region level and at the big group meeting where we take actual insights. We go through them as a team. We talk about um, how individuals, we use real HCPs saying, if you heard this, how would you categorize somebody along a belief or alignment statement or belief map? And then you start to see the team starts to come to some level of consistency on what a 3 is or a 5 is. You have those guiding statements to help them, but you want the team to interpret it as close to the same as possible. So that brings some consistency and accuracy to the data. And doing that over time is one way to overcome this bias the observer biases. Don't measure them against it and practice as a team.
Absolutely. And Roy, one thing I would also add is this is a great uh, uh, opportunity to cross-reference sources. So one team, a couple of teams that we've worked with have actually set up a market research plan so that when somebody reaches a certain measurement in the alignment map, they get put into a queue for a market research call where they're actually asking the same questions that we are looking for as MSLs. And so what we find is that even when you have a very small percentage of people that you reach with that methodology, it puts pressure in the system to have more accurate measurement, right? Because people don't want to be on, to have that call to their HCP where they hear something different. Okay. Absolutely right. Thanks. And then, Mary, the next question is around any guidance on using mindsets in Europe considering privacy laws. Yeah, so I can start on this one. So we have a lot of clients that are doing this globally, worldwide throughout Europe, where we are, and again, every company is somewhere different in their interpretation of those laws, but most of our clients, actually all except for one, um, have already set an expectation with HCPs that when we are meeting with you, we are documenting the fact that we've met with you and that we are sharing, that we're putting in a system. Here's the things that we shared, and here's what we learned from you. Now, some don't report on that at a named HCP level back up to a global organization. Some of them are only doing that in patterns and trends, but there is a lot of precedent. There's a lot of teams that you can point to, and we can look at some of the things coming out of Maps even, where if you set that expectation, then and again, you have to be able to follow the rest of GDPR and be able to show it, remove it, all of that along the way. But if it's no different than any other piece of data that you have on that person is what we tend to see. Okay, Mary, I hope that helps. um All right. Anything else? Please drop that in there. So now we're going to talk a little bit about contribution, right? So, great. We're seeing, that we're collecting measurements. We're watching changes in behavior. We're watching changes in belief. Now, well, what happens when we want to start looking at what medical affairs is doing to help contribute to that? So, oftentimes these measures are actually not too different than what you're already looking at. They just have to be considered in context. So let me ask you, is this MSL team doing a good job? They had 986 interactions last year, right? Did they do a good job? Yes or no? Put it in the chat. Some of you are going, that's a trick question, Scott. I'm not going to play your games. Um, of course, it's a trick question, right? Now, how about this? Right? Don't know. Now, could I ask you this? Um, is 84% of our prioritized KOLs knowing our data subjectively better or objectively better than only 16% of our prioritized KOLs knowing our data? Yeah, right? And so, oftentimes, and this is just a field medical example, just simply setting the context and saying, what are we striving for within our contribution can change the entire message, the entire purpose of that measure, right? And you're still counting the same thing. So, what does this look like? When we're looking at the contribution, again, we've done this with other teams with SciComm, we've done it with operations, we've done it with medical excellence, but we're going to use field medical as an example. So start with, what contribution do you need from the field medical team or from the team you're talking about? Two, what outcome should that contribution help drive? Three, what is a story around the data that allows you to connect the dots between the action and the outcome? Then three, what additional details can help you increase confidence in that story and understanding? So let me show you what this looks like. Step one is you have to be clear on what you expect out of that team. What is the contribution you need? Now, what's been really interesting as we've worked across teams is that based on life cycle, based on size of team, sometimes even based on territory, there's different expectations that are going beyond the traditional KOL engagement, right? So, for example, there's a lot of teams that are really turning towards education of caregivers, right? Those with the most number of patients, right? So we have to start by really getting clear on what is the contribution and then what is the outcome you would expect for that. So here's a couple of examples, right? Around HCP engagement, the outcome might be to increase advocacy of our science by ensuring an understanding of our scientific narrative and assessing the beliefs as measured by the scientific journey outcomes, right? So, in this one piece of my job, engaging with KOLs, really, It's I want to see an increase in advocacy. That's the behavior I want. And the way that I'm going to do that is by increasing understanding and assess if people believe our scientific narrative accurately, right? And what I want to see over time is how many of our prioritized KOLs are fully aligned on or positively aligned on all of our pillars, right? Now we want to see that change over time, and I want to have accurate measure. It might be education, increase early diagnosis by ensuring understanding of the positive patient impact and assessing beliefs measured by a program assessment, right? So we want to see, are the people that are attending our programs learning something that they didn't know? And then when they learn it, do they have an intention to use it? And then 6 months later, 8 months later, do we see them actually putting that into practice? Right? Same thing with Congress support, trial support, whatever those expectations are, get really clear and then build your data story to tell that outcome. Now, for time purposes, I'm not going to build it one thing at a time. I'm just going to jump in. So here's that KOL engagement example, right? So step one is to prioritize. So let's say you have some meaningful data, your KOL profile data, you've done analysis, say there are 1,500 HCPs that we could prioritize, and we've prioritized 97% of them. And yes, you might want to look at it by specialty or segment, or are they high burden geography, things like that. But really, what we're doing is saying against a base number, we are prioritizing engagement with 97% or 80%, whatever it is, right? Based on your capacity. Now, of those, what percentage of them do we have a relationship where we even have an opportunity to make a difference, right? If we don't have the opportunity to make it to engage, we can't have an impact, right? So it recontextualizes the do you see somebody 3 times a year, 4 times a year, twice a year, things like that. Okay, so what percentage do we have an opportunity to make an interaction or an engagement with? Now, of that, what percentage of those have been engaged on each of our key scientific topics, and what percentage of them have all of the information, right? They've been engaged on all 4 or 5 pillars of our scientific narrative. There's nothing new for me to share with them. They're fully aware, they're fully engaged in the topic. And then by topic, what like are they aligned? Right? Of that, how many of them do we have a good alignment measure for? And of that, are they aligned or not aligned? And what percentage of those people do we know why? Right? That's the contribution that field medical makes toward gaining alignment, right? Having the relationship where you have the opportunity to engage, you engage on the key topics, you accurately measure belief or alignment, and then uh, bring back insights about why people are aligned or not. Okay. So when you have the context around that story, then you're able to communicate progress towards that outcome, not just the activity that you've put forth in doing so. Okay. So the teams that we're working with, when they can tell that story, they say, here's the impact. It's either moving fast, it's moving slow by pillar. Now here are the things we're doing. And did the medical education program move the needle? Did our KOL engagement move the needle? All right. So any questions, right, around that contribution? And again, we have other materials that we can provide, but this is really the foundation of, do you have clear expectations and a story around these is how I'm going to look to see if that contribution is connected to the impact. Okay. If you do have questions, please drop them in. And now Linda's going to share that as we look at execution, because we still, right, at the end of the day, we as medical affairs leaders, we as field medical leaders, make a commitment to the organization to accomplish certain things and to use our resources effectively. So, Linda?
Absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough on the contribution side the importance of building your prioritized universe of possible HCPs versus the relationships, because that is really allows you, and when it comes to setting expectations on collecting enough data, that you want to have a significant enough percentage of the possible HCPs to be able to rely that your data can generalize across the broader universe. And so that is an important element of the contribution. Um, Now the part is that's at the team level. Now we're going to start getting into how do we enable our individuals to execute their contribution to the team. And that is 3 steps. They need to know priorities. Do they have capacity? And we did an entire webinar on capacity alone. We have a capacity model, and that we're happy to share. We shared with all the attendees of the webinar, and if you want that information, please reach out. We can provide that. And then the capabilities is the last step. Is you need to be able to enable your teams with all of the right resources and materials and processes to get their job done. And capacity planning has, 4 key steps to it. Again, we went over these in detail, but that is making sure that your teams have the right, the days available to do their job. So you have to take out vacation, sick time. Anytime you pull them out of their jobs to go to a group meeting, or if they have other responsibilities such as training others, all of these take up time, and that has to be allotted for so you can calculate their capacity to do their execution part of the contribution of the team that you're committing your team to do to the impact story. And identifying all of those in order to assess capacity, you have to identify all the key field medical activities. This list is going to be longer than your key contributions because this is what your teams are actually having to do that take time away from doing their jobs or as part of their jobs. Then once you've got that list of things that you have to allot time for, we walk you through how to do estimate. We do a full capacity model. I think this is brilliant. I wish I'd had this when I was a medical leader. But you do 100% capacity model at each line item. If this is all you were doing, how many could you do in a week? And then you translate into percentage of time and how much time they're going to dedicate to those activities in the prioritization step. And so you put all of those together and you actually have a dynamic capacity model that you can use throughout the year to really assess how your teams are spending their time, but also do they have enough time to do their jobs? Let's move to the next slide, and we can see that when you think about capacity, capability, capacity, and priorities, then 3 steps of execution. Capability is how you do something, right? That is, do they have the right materials? Do they have the right training? Do they have all the things that make them capable of doing their jobs? Capacity, as we just talked about, is making sure they have enough time to do their jobs. And the priorities is critical part of this. And it changes over time. Like the first, say 1H, they might have 60% of their time for in field medical to a segment of HCP engagements. But this might change to 40% in the second year based on what the priorities are if something else is happening. So you can move priorities around, but the full capacity model should, with time-tested assessment of people's calendars, should remain consistent. And you can, and the list of activities there is one of the caveats we always build into here. You can make this really, really long list, but in the end, what are the key activities that the team does that you need to allot time for? That is the list you need to create here. So it's going to be longer than your contribution because the contribution is defined by what's contributing to the impact. This is at the individual level, what people have responsibilities to do. And sometimes your senior MSLs have more responsibility to do more training and coaching and mentoring. So you have to make those adjustments at the individual level. And so in the end, to successfully make sure your teams have the ability to execute their job, prioritization is key. Once you start to use your capacity model and collect data, test the integrity of your capacity model. Look at how your individual at a manager, individual team contributor level, look at how they're spending their time. And is that aligned to what you set up in the capacity model? And then again, you can customize it per role and geography. So there, we have a capacity model. We build it. We provide it complimentary to anybody who would like it. Just let us know. But this is really making sure your teams have the capacity, have the capabilities, and understand the priorities to execute against their contribution to the impact story.
Absolutely. And we'll put in the show notes when we send it out the link to the hour-long session on how to do the capacity model, along with the hyperlink to download the tool for it. Um, so this is kind of this is the model, right? You start with impact, work on contribution, then focus on execution. And really, when I think about all those challenges and I think about all the conversations with VPs of medical, with heads of field medical, there's really three things that they're trying to get. And if you find that you're stuck on one of these three, I'm going to show you what to focus on. So the first is they want to be able to demonstrate their value, right? And value are the things that I'm doing making a difference, right? It's the combination of contribution and impact. And when you're being challenged on the value of the things that you're doing, these are the two that you need to focus on. Am I measuring a change in belief that see lead to different behaviors? Am I measuring that well? And are the things I'm doing contributing to a change in that belief? The next challenge is around performance, right? If the reason that you're worried about this, the reason that you joined this webinar today is because you're trying to explain performance of your team and how it's different than the performance of a commercial team, then it's about, well, what are the things that we do and are we executing on those things? Right? Because the execution on the right things is performance. And are we doing enough of them and are we doing them well? Okay, so those would be the two to focus on. And then the last reason that people are calling about this and worried about this and joining webinars about this is because they actually want their teams to be connected to the purpose of why they joined medical affairs to begin with. Right. And they're frustrated when that doesn't happen. And they're worried about retention and they're worried about motivation. And when you can connect what you're doing every day and how you're spending your time in the execution back with impact, like why am I here? Are we making a difference? The why is what connects you to that purpose. Okay, so that is the MedImpact model. Happy to pause for any other questions. We've done this workshop in 2 full days in one day. We've done an hour on each. So, I mean, you can go a lot deeper in any of this. What I'd like to just hear from you in the time that we have left, what's one thing that you need? Like, what do you need in order to take this and apply it in your organization? What'll be the one thing that you need? Where are you with this?
I know when I was in a leader in field medical, but also an executive over medical affairs, y this, like, communication was, cross-functional communication was a critical factor in achieving this, and this really helps, be specific and, about the communication.
Yeah. We just had a really good comment here around, hey, while alignment on the behavior change is important, there's a concern maybe that people would want to connect that to scripts. Um, that becomes the conversation about the role of medical affairs. So we were working with one team where like there wasn't even belief that this disease was like worth diagnosing versus it being a side effect of something else. And they worked hard to see an increase in diagnosis. And then they worked hard in order to uh, ensure that people were testing for a specific clinical outcome that happened that they believe and they had data that was a better clinical outcome than what is currently standard of care, and that the standard of care that would impact that outcome is a different type of treatment that they happen to have one of, and that people believe in their belief. Like if you went to the commercial team and said, "Hey, we're the people are increasing their diagnoses, they're testing, and they believe in, like, that's our contribution to what you're trying to accomplish, right? That's why we're here. So, while we can't and we shouldn't be correlating directly to scripts, we should be seeing if we believe that our science says that our treatment is beneficial. What are those steps leading up to it is important. So thanks. Annabelle, the capability model is important to ensure the team is efficient with their field. Yeah. So Annabelle, thanks you for digging into that. So I am I love really focusing on the capability model, right? Are we good at doing the things that we're doing, and are we efficient within our activities? And so one of the things that's really nice about, and if you watch the capacity model section webinar, we actually talk to the medical excellence and medical operations folks where we say, okay, great, if you are going to deploy a digital tool, or if you're going to bring in new data, what does that do? Does it make me do something better, or does it allow me to do more of something? And it should change your capacity model based on bringing in those tools. So one of the examples from a recent meeting is the limiting factor in the team's ability to impact through medical education was enrollment in medical education programs. Right. They're like, we typically will do 4 or 5 people in like a dinner type program. But if we wanted to go 10x, if we wanted to get to hundreds of people across the country, how could we do that? And they engage their digital team to say, hey, we're going to be running online medical education programs, and we need your help to make people aware of them and fill it. And that would increase our impact. So really get crisp on what is it that you're trying to use those capabilities for. Fantastic. Let's see. Maybe Linda, you can tackle this one. In medical excellence role, the challenge is getting
Yeah.
many teams to do this across the organization. Uh, do you have any advice
Yeah, sure.
on that?
Yeah, I actually, I like this comment because it kind of goes to what I was saying earlier is just the communication, everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. When and to me, it's really about across the medical affairs function. When you have a medical strategy and you've operationalized it through something like the impact story, scientific journey, then all activity should be beholden to that story, and that is sort of all rowing in the same direction. So I think that is and it gives the language to do so when you have this operationalized and everybody is responsible for demonstrating their contribution to the same impact story at the medical affairs level. So that takes effort. It's a little bit of change management, especially when um the what are the most expensive words people utter? This is the way we've always done it, right? To get over that is I think exactly what Scott is saying, is a willingness to commit to the process, understand that it's not gonna be perfect, you're gonna make mistakes, and those mistakes should be used to interrogate the system, and come back around to it. So, this is, it provides words, it provides direction, it provides structure to operationalizing your medical strategy, but there has to be a cross-functional commitment to this is what we're doing, this is what we're measuring, and this is how we're allowing our teams to execute. All of that, you need to get crisp at saying it and committing to it and holding people accountable to it. And that's the change management part of this process.
Excellent. Well, I know we are at the top of the hour. I hope that this gave you a lens to really, take this forward. If you need help, whether it's just a phone call for some advice or people to help, align the organization, please let us know. We are. This is our favorite thing to do, as Linda said, and we hope that you have a great 2025.